The champagne flute shattered against the stone patio, silencing the wedding's laughter like a gunshot. Elliot Kane stood frozen, his navy suit pristine but his heart racing, as every eye turned toward him. He hadn't meant to drop it, hadn't meant to draw attention, but the venom in Aunt Lorraine's voice had sliced through the festive hum, sharp and deliberate. "You're a disgrace, Elliot, flaunting your lifestyle at a sacred event." The word lifestyle landed like a slap, and Elliot felt Mateo's hand tighten on his arm, grounding him. The reception, set in the sprawling gardens of a historic estate in upstate New York, was meant to celebrate love, his cousin Sophia's love, to be precise. But now, under the fairy lights and ancient oaks, it felt like a stage for something uglier. Elliot's jaw clenched as he met Lorraine's glare, her silver hair glinting like a crown of self-righteousness. He wanted to scream, to unravel her sanctimonious facade, but Mateo's soft whisper, "Don't, Elle. Not here," kept him tethered. Elliot Kane wasn't supposed to be the center of attention. He'd come to support Sophia, his favorite cousin, who'd begged him to attend despite her family's conservative streak. At 35, Elliot was a self-made man, a quiet force in the nonprofit world, funding community centers for marginalized youth across the Northeast. His wealth, earned through savvy investments and a tech startup sold years ago, was his armor. But here, among the polished elite of Sophia's new in-laws, the Hawthorns, he felt exposed. Mateo Alvarez, his partner of 3 years, stood beside him, his emerald suit a bold contrast to the muted tones of the crowd. Mateo, a painter whose murals adorned Brooklyn streets, was used to stares, but these felt different, cutting, not curious. The whispers had started during the ceremony. Elliot had felt them, like static in the air, as he and Mateo sat in the third row, their shoulders brushing. Sophia's mother, Lorraine, had shot them a look from the front pew, her lips pursed as if tasting something sour. By the reception, the murmurs grew louder, fueled by champagne and old grudges. The Hawthorns, a wealthy family with deep ties to conservative politics, had never warmed to Sophia's city cousin. Now, with Mateo's arm linked through his, Elliot was a lightning rod. "Elliot," Mateo murmured again, his voice a warm anchor. "Let's just dance." "Screw them." His brown eyes, usually alight with mischief, were steady, urging Elliot to rise above. But before Elliot could respond, Sophia appeared, her ivory gown trailing like a comet's tail. Her face, usually radiant, was tight with worry. "I'm so sorry, Elle," she whispered, pulling him aside. "Mom's been drinking, and the Hawthorns, they're worse than I thought. I didn't know they'd be so cruel." Her eyes flicked to Mateo, who was now chatting with a young woman in a lavender dress, probably one of Sophia's artist friends, deflecting the tension with small talk. "It's fine, Soph," Elliot lied, his voice low. "I'm used to it." But he wasn't. Not here. Not when he'd funded half this wedding out of love for her. The catering, the venue, the string quartet playing Vivaldi in the background. His money had made it possible. Sophia's family wasn't poor, but they weren't Hawthorne rich. Elliot had stepped in, quietly, because Sophia deserved her dream day. Now he wondered if that was a mistake. The evening wore on, and the tension simmered. Mateo pulled Elliot onto the dance floor, their movements fluid despite the weight of judgment. As they swayed to a slow jazz number, Elliot caught snippets of conversation, shameful, inappropriate. Poor Sophia, having to deal with him. He tried to focus on Mateo's warmth, the way his partner's hand rested lightly on his waist, but the words burrowed under his skin. Then came the toast. Sophia's father, Richard, took the microphone, his face flushed from wine. He rambled about love, family, and tradition, but his eyes kept darting to Elliot and Mateo. When he said, "We honor the sanctity of marriage as it was meant to be," the crowd's applause felt like a guillotine. Mateo's grip on Elliot's hand tightened, and Elliot knew. This wasn't just ignorance. It was a deliberate jab. By the time the cake was cut, Elliot's patience was fraying. He excused himself, slipping into the estate's quiet library to breathe. The room smelled of old books and polished wood, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. He sank into a leather chair, staring at his reflection in a darkened window. He wasn't ashamed of who he was, not anymore. But the weight of being seen as less, as wrong, pressed down like a physical force. Mateo found him there, his silhouette framed by the doorway. "You okay, Amor?" he asked, his voice soft but laced with worry. Elliot nodded, but his eyes betrayed him, glistening in the dim light. Mateo crossed the room, kneeling before him, his hands resting on Elliot's knees. "They don't get to define us," he said fiercely. "Not here, not ever." Elliot wanted to believe him, but as he looked into Mateo's eyes, he felt a spark of something new. Not just anger, but resolve. He'd spent years building a life that mattered, funding programs that gave kids like he'd been a chance to thrive. He'd poured his heart into this wedding, into this family, only to be spat on. And for what? Tradition? Sanctity? "I'm done playing nice," Elliot said, his voice low but steady. Mateo's eyes widened, a flicker of pride crossing his face. "What's the plan, then?" Mateo asked, a slow grin spreading. Elliot leaned forward, his mind racing. The Hawthorns Foundation, the one bankrolling their political campaigns and community charities, relied heavily on his investments. He'd been a silent partner, funneling money through intermediaries to avoid scrutiny. But silence, he realized, was complicity. "They want to shame me," Elliot said, his voice hardening. "Let's see how they handle losing their lifeline." Mateo's grin widened. "That's my man." As they rejoined the reception, Elliot felt a shift inside him. The fairy lights still twinkled, the music still played, but he was no longer a guest in their world. He was a reckoning. The night air grew cooler as Elliot and Mateo stepped back into the reception, the music now a pulsing undercurrent to the crowd's chatter. Elliot's resolve burned hotter than the fairy lights overhead, but he kept his face neutral, a mask honed from years of navigating hostile rooms. Mateo, sensing the shift, stayed close, his presence a quiet shield. The plan was forming in Elliot's mind, sharp and deliberate, but he needed to move carefully. The Hawthorns weren't just a family. They were a machine, oiled by money and influence, and Elliot held one of its key gears. Sophia caught his eye from across the lawn, her smile faltering as she sensed his mood. She weaved through the crowd, her gown catching the light, and pulled him aside near a rose trellis. "Elle, what's going on? You look different." Her voice was soft, but her eyes searched his, worried. "I'm fine," Elliot said, forcing a smile. "Just needed a breather." He didn't want to burden her, not tonight. Sophia had always been his ally, the one who'd snuck him comic books when their family shunned him as a teen. But this wasn't her fight. Not yet. She frowned, unconvinced, but her new husband, James Hawthorne, called her back to the dance floor. As she left, Elliot caught James's glance, a flicker of disdain that confirmed what he already knew. The Hawthorns saw him as a stain on their perfect tableau. Mateo leaned in, his breath warm against Elliot's ear. "You sure about this, Amor? Once you pull that thread, there's no going back." His tone was light, but his eyes were serious, searching for any hesitation. Elliot met his gaze, steady. "I've never been sure." He'd spent too long playing by their rules, funding their causes while they sneered at his existence. The Hawthorns Foundation, with its glossy mission of community upliftment, was a front for their political agenda, anti-LGBTQ policies dressed up as family values. Elliot's money had been their silent fuel, and that ended tonight. He pulled out his phone, stepping into the shadow of a towering oak. With a few taps, he accessed the encrypted app he used to manage his investments. The Hawthorns Foundation was tied to a trust he'd set up years ago, back when he thought he could change their minds by proving his worth. The trust funneled millions annually, and Elliot had the power to redirect it or cut it off entirely. "Elle," Mateo said, glancing over his shoulder to ensure they were alone. "If you do this, they'll come for you. You know that, right?" "Let them," Elliot replied, his fingers hovering over the screen. "They've already shown who they are." He thought of the kids his own foundation supported, teens kicked out of their homes, queer kids who needed safe spaces. Every dollar he'd given the Hawthorns could have gone to them instead. Before he could act, a voice cut through the night. Elliot Kane, hiding in the shadows? It was Charles Hawthorne, James's father, his silver hair slicked back, his tuxedo immaculate. His tone was jovial, but his eyes were cold, assessing. I'd hoped you'd enjoy the evening. Sophia speaks so highly of you. Elliot pocketed his phone, his pulse steady. I'm enjoying it as much as I can, Charles. He kept his voice even, but the subtext was clear. I see you. Charles chuckled, swirling his whiskey glass. You know, we appreciate your generosity. This wedding wouldn't have been possible without you. But let's be frank. Your presence here, with him, he nodded toward Mateo, who stood a few feet away, pretending not to listen. It's causing a stir. People talk. Let them talk, Elliot said, his voice low but edged with steel. I'm not here to make your guests comfortable. Charles's smile tightened. Careful, son. You don't want to burn bridges with people like us. The threat hung in the air, but Elliot didn't flinch. Bridges go both ways, Charles. You might want to remember that. Mateo stepped closer, his hand brushing Elliot's, a silent signal to de-escalate. But Elliot was done retreating. As Charles walked away, rejoining the crowd, Elliot pulled out his phone again. With a few swift taps, he initiated the transfer, rerouting the next quarter's funds from the Hawthorne's Foundation to his own nonprofit. It wasn't a full cutoff yet, just a warning shot, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. Back at the reception, the mood had shifted. The younger guests, Sophia's friends from the city, were dancing wildly, oblivious to the undercurrents. Mateo tugged Elliot toward them, his grin infectious. Come on, let's remind them we're here. They joined the dance floor, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just them, Mateo's laughter, the way his hips moved to the beat, the warmth of his hand in Elliot's. But even as they danced, Elliot's mind was elsewhere, mapping out the next steps. The Hawthornes would notice the missing funds soon enough. When they did, the Real fight would begin. As the night wound down, Sophia found them again, her eyes red-rimmed. Mom's been talking to the Hawthornes, she said, her voice trembling. They're saying you're trying to ruin the wedding. Elle, what's going on? Elliot hesitated, then pulled her into a hug. I'm just being me, sophomore. That's all. But as he held her, he knew the truth. He wasn't just being himself. He was rewriting the rules. The morning after the wedding, the estate was quiet, the remnants of last night's revelry scattered like confetti across the lawn. Elliot sat on the balcony of their guest suite, a coffee mug warming his hands, staring at the rolling hills of upstate New York. Mateo was still asleep inside, his soft snores a comforting hum against the weight of what Elliot had done. The fund transfer was complete, a silent act of defiance that would ripple through the Hawthornes' world soon enough. But for now, the calm felt deceptive, like the hush before a storm. Elliot's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. A text from Sophia, we need to talk. Meet me at the cafe in town. Please. Her words carried an urgency that made his stomach twist. He glanced back at Mateo, sprawled across the bed, his dark hair a mess against the white sheets. Elliot didn't want to wake him, not yet. This was his burden to carry. The cafe in town was a quaint spot, all exposed brick and mismatched furniture, a stark contrast to the Hawthornes' opulence. Sophia was already there, tucked into a corner booth, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep. She looked up as Elliot approached, her expression a mix of guilt and fear. Elle, what did you do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James's father called me this morning. He said their foundation got a notification about a funding change. They're furious, and they think it's you. Elliot slid into the booth, his face calm, but his mind racing. It was me, he admitted, keeping his voice low. I redirected the next quarter's funds to my nonprofit. They don't get to shame me and keep my money. Sophia's eyes widened, her hands gripping her coffee mug. Elle, you can't just. Do you know what this means? The Hawthornes are powerful. They'll come after you, your work, everything. I know, Elliot said, leaning back. But I'm done letting them use me. They've been funding campaigns that hurt people like me, sophomore. My money was enabling that. I can't live with it anymore. She shook her head, tears welling. I get it, I do. But Mom's already talking about cutting you out of the family. And James, he's not like his parents, but he's caught in the middle. I don't want to lose you. Elliot reached across the table, squeezing her hand. You won't lose me, but I need to do this. For me, for Mateo, for the kids I'm trying to help. His voice softened. I'm sorry if this messes things up for you. Sophia wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. Just be careful, okay? They're not going to let this go. Back at the estate, Mateo was awake, sketching on a notepad at the kitchen counter. His eyes lit up when Elliot walked in, but his smile faded at the tension in Elliot's posture. What happened? He asked, setting the pencil down. Elliot recounted the conversation, his voice steady but his hands restless, twisting a napkin into knots. Mateo listened, his expression shifting from concern to fierce pride. You're doing the right thing, he said, pulling Elliot into a hug. But we need a plan. They're not going to take this lying down. Elliot nodded, his mind already spinning. The Hawthorns would likely retaliate through their network, political allies, media contacts, maybe even legal threats. He needed to protect his nonprofit, his team, and Mateo. But he also needed allies. He thought of Rachel, the young woman in the lavender dress from the wedding, one of Sophia's artist friends who'd seemed supportive. She was a journalist, he recalled, with a small but growing platform. Maybe she could help. He called Rachel that afternoon, catching her just as she was leaving the estate. Her voice was bright, curious. Elliot, hey? Last night was intense. You okay? Not exactly, he said, explaining the situation in measured tones. He didn't mention the funding yet, just the hostility, the shaming, the undercurrent of hate. Rachel listened, her silence thoughtful. I've seen it before, she said finally. Families like the Hawthorns, they thrive on control. If you're up for it, I can write about this. Not just the wedding, but their foundation, their politics. I've got sources who've been digging into their funding for years. Elliot hesitated. Going public could escalate things, but it could also shift the narrative. Do it, he said. But keep my name out for now. Focus on them. Deal, Rachel said, a grin in her voice. I'll start digging. That evening, Elliot and Mateo sat on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the hills gold. Mateo's hand rested on Elliot's, their fingers intertwined. You're shaking things up, amor, Mateo said, his voice warm. I'm proud of you. Elliot smiled, but his chest was tight. He'd started a war, and the first battle was coming. The Hawthorns would notice the missing funds soon. Maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight. When they did, they'd come for him. But as he looked at Mateo, at the life they'd built together, he knew he'd made the right choice. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every kid who'd ever been shamed, every love that had been silenced. The storm broke 2 days later. Elliot was in his Manhattan office, a sleek space overlooking the Hudson, when his assistant, Priya, knocked urgently. Elliot, you've got a call from Charles Hawthorne. He sounds unhinged. Her brown eyes were wide with concern, her usual calm shaken. Elliot nodded, steeling himself. He'd expected this, but not so soon. He picked up the phone, his voice cool. Charles, what's this about? You know damn well what this is about, Charles spat, his polished veneer gone. The Foundation's funds, rerouted without notice? You think you can play games with us, Kane? Elliot leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. It's my money, Charles. I decide where it goes. Your Foundation's priorities don't align with mine anymore. There was a pause, heavy with rage. You're making a mistake, Charles said, his voice low and dangerous. We have friends, Elliot. People who can make your life difficult. Your little nonprofit won't survive this. Elliot's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even. Threats don't change facts. You've been using my money to fund hate. That stops now. Charles laughed, a cold, brittle sound. Hate? You're delusional. We're protecting values, values you clearly don't understand. You'll regret this. The line went dead. Elliot set the phone down, his hand steady but his heart pounding. He'd known the Hawthorns would fight dirty, but hearing it laid bare still stung. He texted Mateo. It started. Charles just called. Mateo's reply was instant. I'm with you. Always. The words grounded him, a reminder of why he was doing this. By noon, the first signs of retaliation appeared. An email from a major donor to Elliot's nonprofit, citing concerns about stability, pulled their funding. Then came a call from a board member, rattled by whispers of a smear campaign. The Hawthorns were moving fast, leveraging their network to paint Elliot as unstable, reckless, a man who'd betray family for personal gain. Elliot called Rachel, who'd been working on her exposé. They're coming for me, he said, pacing his office. Anything on your end? I've got something, Rachel replied, her voice buzzing with excitement. A source just confirmed the Hawthorns Foundation funneled money to a PAC supporting anti-LGBTQ legislation last year. It's buried in shell companies, but I've got the paper trail. I'm meeting another source tonight to verify. Elliot's pulse quickened. That's huge. How soon can you publish? Give me 2 days, she said. I want it airtight. He hung up, feeling a flicker of hope. If Rachel could expose the Hawthorns' hypocrisy, it might shift the narrative. But he needed to protect his own work in the meantime. He called Priya in, outlining a plan to secure their funding, reaching out to progressive donors, diversifying their portfolio, preparing for a fight. That evening, Mateo met him at their Brooklyn apartment, a cozy loft filled with his vibrant murals. He pulled Elliot into a kiss, his hands framing Elliot's face. You look like you're carrying the world, Mateo said, his eyes searching. Talk to me. Elliot sank onto the couch, recounting the day, Charles's threats, the donor pullout, Rachel's lead. Mateo listened, his expression fierce. They're scared, El. You've got them cornered, and they know it. I hope so, Elliot said, rubbing his temples. But they're not done. I need to be ready for whatever they throw next. Mateo grinned, pulling out his sketchpad. Then let's fight back with something they can't ignore. He sketched a mural concept, a vibrant, defiant celebration of queer love, meant for a community center Elliot funded. We put this up, make it loud. Show them we're not hiding. Elliot's heart swelled. Mateo's art had always been his rebellion, a way of claiming space in a world that tried to erase them. Do it, he said. Make it unforgettable. The next day, Elliot met with his nonprofits board, laying out the situation. Most were supportive, but a few were nervous, wary of the Hawthorns' influence. He reassured them, his voice steady, but inside, he felt the pressure mounting. The Hawthorns weren't just a family. They were a network, and they'd weaponize every connection to crush him. By evening, Rachel sent a draft of her article. It was explosive, detailing the Hawthorns' funding of anti-LGBTQ campaigns while posing as community benefactors. Elliot read it twice, his chest tight with anticipation. This could change everything, or it could make him a bigger target. As he lay in bed with Mateo that night, the city's hum a soft backdrop, Elliot felt a rare moment of peace. Whatever happens, he whispered, I'm glad you're here. Mateo kissed his forehead. Always amor. We've got this. Rachel's article hit the internet like a thunderclap. Published on a progressive news site with a national reach, it laid bare the Hawthorns' hypocrisy, their foundation's charitable facade masking millions funneled to anti-LGBTQ causes. Social media erupted, hashtags like Hawthorn hypocrisy trending by noon. Elliot watched the storm unfold from his office, his phone buzzing with notifications, support from allies, outrage from strangers, and a few cryptic messages from unknown numbers that felt like veiled threats. Mateo was at the community center, painting his mural. He'd sent Elliot a photo, bold swirls of color, 2 figures embracing under a rainbow sky, their faces blurred but unmistakably defiant. The caption read, For us. For them. Elliot saved the image, a reminder of what he was fighting for. But the Hawthorns didn't stay quiet. By mid-afternoon, a statement from their foundation appeared, denying the allegations and framing Elliot as a disgruntled former donor with a personal vendetta. It was slick, professional, and infuriatingly effective. Comments online began to shift, some questioning Rachel's sources, others accusing Elliot of sabotage. He felt the ground shifting beneath him, but he refused to waver. Sophia called, her voice shaky. El, it's a mess. Mom's saying you've ruined the family's reputation. James is trying to stay neutral, but his parents are livid. They're talking about suing you. Let them try, Elliot said, his voice calm but his grip on the phone tight. They don't have a case. I redirected my own money, sophomore. They can't touch me legally. But they can hurt you other ways, she said, her voice breaking. I'm scared for you. Elliot softened. I know. I'm sorry you're caught in this. But I can't back down. Not now. After hanging up, he called Rachel. They're hitting back hard, he said. Anything else you can dig up? I'm working on it, she replied. I've got a lead on a former Hawthorne employee who says they've got more dirt. Offshore accounts, maybe. I'll keep you posted. Elliot spent the day shoring up his nonprofit's defenses, meeting with lawyers and donors to counter the Hawthorne's narrative. But the stress was wearing on him. By evening, he was exhausted, his eyes burning from hours of emails and calls. He headed to the community center to see Mateo's mural in person, needing a moment of reprieve. The center was alive with activity. Teens playing basketball, volunteers organizing a workshop. Mateo was on a ladder, adding final touches to the mural. The figures were larger than life, their embrace a beacon of hope against the brick wall. Elliot stood below, his throat tight. "It's perfect," he said as Mateo climbed down, paint smudged on his cheek. Mateo grinned, pulling him close. "It's us, Amor. And it's them." He nodded toward a group of teens watching, their eyes wide with awe. One, a shy boy with dyed blue hair, approached. "Is this for people like me?" the boy asked, his voice small. Elliot's heart ached. "Yeah," he said. "It's for all of us." The boy smiled, a flicker of courage in his eyes, and Elliot felt the weight of his fight settle into place. This was why he was doing this. Not just for himself, but for kids like this, who deserve to be seen. That night, a new thread emerged. Priya forwarded an email from a Hawthorne ally, a prominent donor, hinting at a reputational review of Elliot's nonprofit. It was vague but ominous, a sign the Hawthornes were digging deeper. Elliot forwarded it to his lawyer, his resolve hardening. They could try to bury him, but he'd built his life on resilience. Mateo, sensing his tension, suggested a walk through Brooklyn. They wandered the streets, the city's pulse a soothing contrast to the chaos. At a quiet park, Mateo stopped, turning to Elliot. "You're doing something huge," he said, his voice low. "But you don't have to do it alone. Let me help." Elliot looked at him, the man who'd stood by him through every storm. "You already are," he said, pulling Mateo into a kiss. The world felt lighter for a moment, but the fight was far from over. The Hawthornes escalated their attack the next week. A local news outlet, known for its conservative slant, ran a hit piece on Elliot, painting him as a vindictive millionaire using his wealth to punish a respected family. The article twisted facts, claiming his nonprofit was a front for radical agendas. Comments online were brutal, and Elliot's inbox filled with hate mail. He deleted most without reading, but the sheer volume was a reminder of the Hawthornes' reach. Mateo, ever the optimist, tried to keep him grounded. "They're loud because they're scared," he said over breakfast in their loft, his hands busy sketching a new mural idea. Rachel's article hit them where it hurts. "They're scrambling." Elliot nodded, but the pressure was relentless. His nonprofit's board was rattled, and another donor pulled out, citing controversy. He spent hours on calls, reassuring allies and strategizing with his team. Priya, his assistant, was a rock, filtering the noise and keeping operations running. But even she looked worried, her usual efficiency tinged with caution. Rachel called with an update. "My source came through," she said, her voice electric. "The Hawthornes have been hiding donations to a network of anti-LGBTQ groups through offshore accounts. I've got documents, dates, amounts, everything. I'm meeting my editor tomorrow to finalize the follow-up." Elliot's heart raced. "That's a game changer. When can it go live?" "End of the week, if all goes well," she said. "But, Elliot, they're watching you. My source says they're digging into your finances, looking for anything to discredit you." "Let them look," he said, though his stomach churned. He'd been careful, but no one was untouchable. He thanked Rachel and hung up, his mind racing with next steps. That afternoon, he met with his lawyer, Sarah, a sharp woman who'd handled his startup sale years ago. She reviewed the Hawthornes' threats and the hit piece, her expression grim. "They're trying to scare you into backing down," she said. "Legally, you're in the clear, your money, your choice. But they could drag this out with lawsuits, bleed you dry in court." Elliot nodded, his jaw tight. "What about my nonprofit? Can they hurt us?" "They'll try," Sarah said. "But your books are clean and your mission strong. If Rachel's expose lands, public opinion could swing your way. Just stay out of the mud. Don't give them ammunition. That evening, Elliot and Mateo attended a fundraiser at the community center. The mural was complete, its vibrant colors drawing a crowd of teens and supporters. The shy boy from before, now wearing a rainbow pin, thanked Elliot again, his confidence growing. It was a small victory, but it fueled Elliot's fire. As they mingled, a stranger approached, a man in his 50s, polished but cold. "Elliot Kane?" he asked, extending a hand. "I'm Victor Reese, a friend of the Hawthorns. We should talk." Elliot's instincts screamed caution, but he shook the man's hand. "What's there to talk about?" Victor smiled, all teeth. "You're making waves. My clients don't like waves. Maybe there's a way we can smooth things over." Mateo stepped closer, his presence protective. "He's not interested," he said, his voice firm. Victor's smile didn't waver. "Think about it, Elliot. You've got a lot to lose." He slipped a business card into Elliot's hand and walked away. Elliot stared at the card, his blood boiling. "They're trying to buy me off," he said, crumpling it. Mateo's eyes flashed. "They're desperate. That means you're winning." But the encounter rattled Elliot. Back home, he couldn't sleep, his mind replaying Victor's words. He checked his accounts, ensuring everything was secure. The Hawthorns were circling, and he needed to be ready. The next day, Rachel's follow-up article dropped early. It was a bombshell, detailing the offshore accounts and naming politicians tied to the Hawthorns' money. The backlash was immediate. Protests outside the Hawthorns' offices, calls for investigations. Elliot watched the news, a mix of triumph and dread. He'd struck a blow, but the war wasn't over. The fallout was seismic. By the end of the week, the Hawthorns Foundation was under federal scrutiny, their donors fleeing, their reputation in tatters. Rachel's expose had done its job, amplified by protests and viral posts. Elliot's nonprofit, meanwhile, saw an influx of support, new donors, volunteers, even messages from queer youth thanking him for standing up. But victory came at a cost. The Hawthorns' allies were relentless, flooding social media with smears, and Elliot's nonprofit faced audits, likely instigated by their connections. Elliot sat in his office, staring at a thank-you note from the blue-haired teen at the community center. It was simple, scrawled in marker. "You made me feel like I matter." He pinned it to his board, a reminder of why he'd started this fight. Mateo walked in, paint still on his hands from a new mural project. "You did it, Amor," he said, kissing Elliot's forehead. "They're crumbling." "Not yet," Elliot said, his voice tired but resolute. "They're wounded, but they're not done." He was right. Charles Hawthorne called that afternoon, his tone no longer smug, but desperate. "You've made your point, Kane," he said. "Let's talk. We can work this out." Elliot leaned back, his eyes on Mateo, who was watching him closely. "No deal, Charles. You made your bed." "You're destroying lives," Charles snapped. "Our work, our legacy." "Your work hurt people," Elliot cut in. "My money's going where it belongs now." The call ended with Charles's heavy breathing, a defeated sound. But Elliot knew better than to trust it. He met with Sarah, his lawyer, to prepare for any legal fallout. She was optimistic. The Hawthorns' case was weak, and public support was on Elliot's side. Still, she warned him to stay vigilant. Sophia reached out next, her voice softer than before. "I'm proud of you, Elle," she said. "I talked to Mom. She's struggling, but she's starting to see things differently. I think you got through to her, even if she won't admit it." Elliot's chest tightened. "And you? Are you okay?" "I'm with you," she said. "Always." The weeks that followed were a blur of rebuilding. Elliot's nonprofit thrived, its mission resonating louder than ever. Mateo's murals spread to other centers, each one a testament to resilience. The Hawthorns faded from the spotlight, their influence eroded by truth. One evening, Elliot and Mateo stood before the first mural, its colors glowing under streetlights. The community center was hosting a youth event, laughter spilling from inside. Elliot took Mateo's hand, his heart full. "We did this," he said, his voice thick. Mateo smiled, pulling him close. "You did this. I just painted the picture." Elliot laughed, the sound free and light. He'd faced shame, threats, and loss, but he'd also found strength. In himself, in Mateo, in the kids they fought for. The wedding that had sparked this fight felt distant now, A painful memory transformed into a catalyst for change. As they walked home, the city alive around them, Elliot felt a quiet triumph. He'd pulled the plug on hate, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. And in Mateo's steady presence, he knew he'd never fight alone.